and foes, Shakuni. You ask me to let him be. Though unwilling, I am sure I could, but will he let me do that? Duryodhana's words rang in Uruvi's ears. She knew she could not reply to Duryodhana's hateful question. She had the answer but had to leave it unspoken. A few days later, that answer was put into words by Karna sooner than she had expected. The occasion was a grand feast hosted by Duryodhana and his wife Bhanumati for the newly-wed couple. Karna looked pleased when he informed his bride about it but noticed she did not look too thrilled about the invitation. You don't look very happy about the feast. I am not comfortable with those people, she started hesitatingly, but decided to mince no further words. Why is Duryodhana inviting us when his mother had made it plain that she dislikes us? Queen Gandhari cold shoulders me and she doesn't even speak to you civilly. Moreover, has Duryodhana ever invited you and Vrushali together to his palace? She asked bluntly. No, he hasn't. But that's because you have a different equation with Duryodhana. You have known him since childhood, but Vrushali barely knows him. And where Queen Gandhari is concerned, I know she disapproves of my closeness with her son. I am way too beneath them. Uruvi looked impatient. She doesn't affect me, but Duryodhana does. Like her, I don't understand why you need to be so close to him. No one likes him, not your mother nor your brother. Vrushali disapproves of him. And so do I, she flashed. I wasn't particularly fond of him in our childhood either. He was mean and manipulative then, he is still so now. I know you dislike him. But that does not change my feelings for my friend, Karna replied evenly. I am not telling you to change yours nor can you change mine. All I am telling you is that we have been invited for a lunch feast and propriety demands we graciously go. Uruvi tried to sound sensible. I shall go for the feast, but just this one time. Please do not expect me to socialize with a person I do not like, and whom, frankly, you need to stay away from. Karna, Duryodhana is not a good man, she added weakly. Karna smiled wryly and Uruvi looked sharply at him. I am serious. It's not just me, no one who loves you is pleased about your close association with Duryodhana. All of us are worried. He is known to be a power-hungry wolf, and is using you as his strongest weapon against the Pandavas. And worse, he is dragging you into his private war with his cousins. It's a family feud and it's best you stay clear of it. What I am telling you is what so many others have warned me about often as well. But, it goes a long way, and I cannot not be his friend because of his flaws. You accept a friend with his faults, however bad. Uruvi responded, saying bluntly. His faults will be your undoing. You are not one of the Kauravas. You are not family. You are not like him. He was the only one who has helped me at all times. Always, he repeated quietly. By crowning you king of Anga, has he bought you body and soul, Karna? Are you so indebted to him that you are blinded with gratitude? A friend is one who advises the other when he goes wrong. Have you ever told your friend that he is wrong? That he was wrong when he tried to poison his cousin Bhima? That he is wrong when he does not give what rightfully belongs to the Pandavas, their share of the kingdom? That he was so wrong when he tried to kill the Pandavas and Kunti in the Lak Palace? That's not true, it's a wicked rumor. Karna lashed out angrily. You did not tell him all this because you, like him, believe he is right, she pursued relentlessly. In your blind love for your friend, you cannot see nor distinguish between good and bad, right and wrong. Uruvi softened her voice, trying to be placating. You refuse to believe the worst about your friend. He is influencing you the same way he himself was so evilly influenced by his uncle, Shakuni. Duryodhana, sadly, is a poisoned man, nursed on hate and envy since childhood. I don't blame him, he has been brought up to consider the Pandavas as his enemies. Why do you patronize such bitterness in a man whom you call your friend? Because whatever his nature may be, he is loyal. And he is my friend, replied Karna calmly. It was Duryodhana who helped me when I was being publicly disparaged at the archery contest. It was Duryodhana who first acknowledged me as a worthy warrior. It was Duryodhana who made me a Kshatriya, by merit if not by birth. When I was ridiculed by Draupadi at her Swayamvara, it was Duryodhana who stood by me. It was Duryodhana who challenged King Drupad and Drishtadyumna and questioned their intentions at the same Swayamvara. It is Duryodhana who sides with me whenever Dronakarya and Bhishma Pitamaha are dismissive about me. It is Duryodhana who has given me the respect that I am worthy of. No one else has done that. Rejected by all, I have found honor among the Kauravas. For all this and more, I shall be eternally grateful to Duryodhana. But he does all that because he needs you, she argued, a desperate plea in her voice. He needs you to fight his final battle with the Pandavas. Without you, he can never win against them. Without you, the Kauravas are nothing. Assured of your unwavering loyalty, Duryodhana can afford to be arrogant and forceful. He can claim all rights to the inheritance, even though the elders believe at least half of it, if not all, belongs to the Pandavas. That is why Dronakarya and Bhishma Pitamaha resent you, because it is through you that Duryodhana is so flagrantly powerful. Duryodhana has been spurred by his father's unfulfilled aspirations, a father who is blinded by the ambition to be king. And on your part, Karna, you are indebted to him for the social sanction and the kingdom he has bestowed on you. But you are bound to a person who is not worthy of either your love or your friendship. Duryodhana cannot be anyone's friend. He is simply using you against his cousins. The Duryodhanas of the world will seek you out because they need you to serve their interest. You are his best ace against them, can't you see through him? I will always stand by him, whoever and whatever I am against. Karna's words were deceptively soft, his face a mask of cold inscrutability. Duryodhana gave me the kingdom without my asking for it, and I shall give him my undying friendship in return. I promised him I shall serve him till my last breath, and I am committed to him for life. Only Duryodhana offered me an opportunity to prove myself, to be a king, a warrior and an archer, and I took it. And sold your soul in the bargain. She countered angrily. He is violating your conscience. You are wasting your loyalty on a person who has no integrity, no dharma, Uruvi implored, realizing her words were being drowned by his unflinching loyalty. He could be, but for me he is simply a friend, a savior, who stood by me in my worst hour. Uruvi, he may be evil but I see his goodness too. But that doesn't justify his vices. O Karna, he is dragging you to a certain no man's land. Where is all this hate and intrigue and revenge going to lead? To conflict, that is inevitable, isn't it? Where is power ever without politics and conflict? But you have never been greedy for power, you don't want it. She argued, twin angry spots on her cheeks. Power can never corrupt you, for you have never hankered for it. And the tussle is not for power, it's one-upmanship between the cousins. They seem to be fighting for the throne, which Duryodhana does not believe in sharing. But with you it's never been this lust for the throne or the crown. All I ever wanted was respect, Uruvi. And Duryodhana has given me that, Karna said quietly. I aspired for nothing else. I wanted to be recognized for my merits. Not for what I was born as. Not for my lineage, or rather, lack of it. There was an unaccustomed harshness in his voice, his rigidity contrasting starkly with the helplessness she knew he was actually feeling. Yes, Duryodhana has given me the respect and honor that I strived so hard for, and when I look at him, I feel blessed. He has everything yet he has nothing. I have a family who loves me unconditionally. I am Radheya, proud to be the son of Radha, but is Duryodhana proud to be Queen Gandhari's son? He has a mother, but has never known the warmth and selflessness of maternal love. He has a father, but has King Dhritarashtra carried out his responsibilities towards him? Instead of guiding his son, he is lost in his own unfulfilled ambition and unrequited hopes, groping in vain for kingship. Duryodhana seems to be born in hate for hate. Did Queen Gandhari ever forgive King Dhritarashtra for forcing her to marry him? That resentment percolated to her son as well. She was so disappointed that Duryodhana was not born before Yudhishthira that she was ready to abort him. Said Karna scathingly, "I was dumped by my natural mother after I was born, but here is a mother who was ready to kill her son before his birth. How then, can he not be branded with hate and evil? As a baby, was he ever held with love and affection? His father was blind, so he could not see his first newborn, but his mother did not remove her blindfold even to have a glimpse of the son she had so desperately wished for. She rejected him solely because he was not born early enough. Oh, Uruvi, he has been brought up in heartlessness, within the confines of indifference. His mother never really bothered about him, his father saw him only as an heir, not a son to be loved and cared for. He has been brought up on hate by his uncle, who seeks revenge for the injustice done to him, his father and his sister by the Kuru clan. Shakuni seeks his revenge through his nephew, slowly poisoning his mind and soul to make him the puppet he wants him to be. Duryodhana was doomed before he was even born. He was born a child of hatred and lives to hate. Uruvi listened to him in silence. She absorbed his words almost unwillingly, trying to understand what he was saying. He was like a brave soldier battling against the whole world, which was in conspiracy against him, yet he was fighting hard for his friend. His heart was full of sorrow for his condemned friend, understanding him because his own life had been a long struggle against desperate odds. People had treated him shabbily, fate had consistently played foul with him, and yet by sheer grit and genius he had overcome all with grace and humility. He now stood by a man who had defended him. Allegiance prevailed, loyalty won. And yet you prefer to live in hate and thrive in revenge. Is that the price you are paying for the good he seems to have done for you? Can you ever be happy, Karna? The anger had evaporated from her argument, her words gnawed by sadness. I am happy, he said quickly. I am lucky I have you. I am proud I am Radheya. I am blessed that I am loved. And if I can give a little of that consideration for Duryodhana who has never got love, I think I am doing him a little good, he sighed deeply. My dharma is to be with my friend. I owe it to him. My passion is archery. And it is your love, the love of my parents, my children, Vrushali and Shona that fills my heart. These will guide my life and lead me to glory. I don't aspire for anything else, Uruvi. Except Arjuna's defeat by me, he finished softly. If Karna disliked Arjuna, it was because of the resentment and rivalry between them. But the utter loathing in Karna's heart was reserved only for one man, Shakuni, the person both Uruvi and Karna abhorred. Uruvi wondered if anyone did approve of the man except for his 100 Kuru nephews. The only one of the old king's sons who hated Shakuni was Yuyutsu, who was King Dhritarashtra's son from a low-caste handmaid, and was, therefore, treated as a pariah, just as Karna was. It seems even Shakuni's blindfolded sister Queen Gandhari was not too fond of her brother and was mistrustful of his continuous presence at Hastinapur. With her silken blindfold around her eyes, the sister tried to steer herself far, far away from the tussle of power, politics and intrigue, the three games her brother loved playing. Shakun's presence at Hastinapur was a mystery that few could fathom, and even Bhishma Pitamaha was unable to get rid of him. As the brother of the queen, he had no reason whatsoever to stay in the kingdom of his sister's husband. But he had an impelling motive. If rumors were to be believed, it seems the root of the problem had been Bhishma Pitamaha himself. Shakuni's burning resentment against Bhishma Pitamaha was that but for him, his sister could have wed Prince Pandu, the heir apparent, instead of the blind Prince Dhritarashtra. He could not forgive the treachery behind this marriage. Neither could he forget that by marrying off his sister to a blind king, Gandhari and her children had been forever deprived of the kingdom that was rightfully Dhritarashtra's. It had been Prince Pandu he had wanted as his sister's husband, not Prince Dhritarashtra, who had lost out on his claim to the throne because of his blindness. Shakuni could never forgive the ecclesiastical old man or the entire Kuru dynasty for having swindled his sister Gandhari and his father King Subala into what he believed was a farcical marriage. They had been made to think that Gandhari would be marrying the king of Hastinapura, and that was King Pandu. But Bhishma Pitamaha had other plans which, though well orchestrated, did not fall in place the way he had intended. The terrible fallout of this miscalculation was to prove the biggest blunder, shattering the peace of the Kuru clan forever. Bhishma Pitamaha's intentions had been noble. Realizing that Prince Dhritarashtra had lost out on his throne because of his blindness, the grand-uncle decided to compensate by marrying off the older prince early, hoping that the first child would be the heir to the Kuru crown. That was why he had hurried King Subala of Gandhar and forced him to give his daughter, the beautiful Gandhari, in marriage to Prince Dhritarashtra. Their firstborn child would be the king of Hastinapur and justice would be reinstated for the blind prince. But these grand designs did not turn out as planned. It seems that even Queen Satyavati was unhappy that Bhishma Pitamaha had enthroned King Pandu instead of the older son, Dhritarashtra. Unlike the last time decades ago, when as the new stepmother of young Bhishma, or Prince Devrata as he was known then, the ambitious Queen Satyavati had forced him into his terrible vow of celibacy to protect her and her children, Bhishma remained stubborn and did not yield to her arguments. The explanation given to her was that as Dhritarashtra was blind, he would not be able to look after the affairs of the state. That was the reason why the throne was best suited for Prince Pandu, her grandson and the younger son of King Vichitravirya. By choosing to get the blind prince married before Pandu was wedded, Bhishma Pitamaha had planned to enthrone Dhritarashtra's son as the heir to the throne. But it was not to be. Yudhishthira was born before Duryodhana and that mantle fell on him. A livid Shakuni swore vengeance when King Pandu was crowned king. His sister showed her protest more subtly. She accepted her fate with a smile on her face and a silk cloth around her eyes, so that she would experience the world in darkness, just as her blind husband did. The revengeful brother, watching his sister's self-flagellating blindness, promised himself he would sink the Kuru kingdom into an even deeper darkness than what his sister had plunged herself into. Always clad in dark silks, Shakuni sported a white beard, which was a rather unexpected contrast on his round, jolly face. This evil genius always wore a smile, appearing deceptively cheerful with his bright grin and a perpetual glint in his eyes. Many mistook it for a merry sense of humor. He had otherwise small, undistinguished features and his eyes were tiny. His fleshy face matched his corpulent body, the belly protruding oddly to give him an almost comical look. But that, again, was as deceptive as the man himself. Whenever he met Uruvi, the elderly uncle never failed to greet her with a warm smile and an exaggerated bow. "Ah, the Princess of Pukia. Good day to you, Princess," he would say sarcastically, emphasizing her royal designation, which never failed to make her uneasily aware that she was no longer a princess but a Sutaputra's wife. One day, she decided to take him on. "Good day to you, sir," she returned with a sunny smile. "I appreciate the fact that you do not forget to call me princess. How can I ever forget whose daughter I am? Just like you are the prince of Gandhar, staying in Hastinapur, I am the princess of Pukia living in Hastinapur as well." Uruvi saw his eyes going frosty, but the smile did not slip from his face. The arrogance behind his jovial facade never let anyone forget that he was the Prince of Gandhar, the son of King Subala and the only surviving brother of Queen Gandhari, living for one nefarious goal, the fall of the Kuru dynasty. He loved the game of dice, and never could be seen without his twin dices, which he constantly rubbed in his hands. There was a gory story that the dices he caressed so lovingly were made from his father's thigh bones. Uruvi shuddered at the thought of it, and recoiled at the gorier tale she had heard of this evil prince. On the advice of astrologers, the lovely Gandhari was married to a goat before she married the Prince of Hastinapur, as her astrological charts declared she would be a widow and only her second husband would survive. When her husband, King Dhritarashtra, discovered this, he flew into a rage and imprisoned his father-in-law and brothers-in-law, banishing them to dank dungeons, where they were given only a fistful of rice to share every day. Knowing that they would starve to death, the old king Subala gave only his youngest son the meager meal so that he would survive and avenge their deaths. That youngest son was Shakuni, who was released only when Gandhari pleaded with her husband. And that was why he had stayed on to plot his revenge and hasten the end of the Kuru clan. With the dice in his hands, he soon made King Dhritarashtra, Duryodhana and Dushasana his unwitting pawns in his game of revenge and retribution. His sister, blindfolding herself from this awful truth, remained oblivious of his motives. He is so shrewd, he can see through people's flaws, that's how he plays his game of manipulation, remarked Karna to Uruvi when rumors of the Kauravas' attempt to kill the Pandavas in the Lak Palace at Varanavada refused to die down. He plays on the weak points of his foe and corners him in his own trap. He is preying on Duryodhana's weakness, which is his jealousy of his cousins. Similarly, he plays on the weakness of the Pandavas, their mildness, and has managed to pit the two groups of cousins against each other. He intends to destroy both. He is vile, he is wicked. He is a rat, who doesn't have the courage to face his enemy up front, but would rather devour them through stealthy nibbling. He can cause untold destruction, and would be the first one to escape from it. An evil coward, that's what he is. Karna spat, livid that he was powerless to make his friend see through the malevolence of the sinister uncle whom he loved so devotedly. Uruvi could not have agreed more with her husband, but she thought there was more to Shakuni's plot, something even more devious. She wondered whether King Pandu had been spared from his treachery. King Pandu was said to have died of sage Kindama's curse, but had he? Or had he been murdered by Shakuni's spies? Once, when King Pandu had gone hunting, he shot down a deer, but the wounded animal was actually Rishi Kindama, who had taken the form of a deer while lovemaking. The dying sage cursed the horrified King Pandu that he would die if he were ever to consummate his marriage. Once, in a moment of weakness, King Pandu made love to his second wife Queen Madri, and the king died in his wife's arms. A grief-stricken Madri then jumped into her husband's funeral pyre. Why, Uruvi always wondered, would Queen Madri consign herself to the flames, when no queen before her had joined their husband in the funeral pyre? Moreover, why would the mother of tiny, helpless 6-month-old twins, Nikul and Sahadeva, kill herself and leave them orphaned and under the care of her husband's first wife? It was strange. Had Madri, too, been mortally wounded like her husband, King Pandu, when they had been attacked? Had she been able to talk to Kunti before she died? Had Shakuni played up the curse of the sage to his advantage after all? If he could instigate Duryodhana to burn the Pandavas and the Queen Mother in the Lak Palace, he would not have any qualms in murdering King Pandu too. The only person who probably knew the truth was Kunti, but she was an evasive lady who knew how to keep her secrets. Uruvi recalled how she had pestered her on her wedding day about whether she had any regrets, but had got nothing out of her. Uruvi, however, had never dared to express such thoughts, neither to Karna nor Kunti. She didn't want to add to the atmosphere of suspicion at the royal court where treacherous mind games were being played. Shakuni had always seen to it that he played his cards right, ensuring that Dhritarashtra remained the king of Hastinapur. First through the blind king and now through Duryodhana, he had secured greater power for himself. Unlike his sister who had turned away from the politics of power, he reveled in it. He lusted after power, the power to destroy his enemies. Uruvi recalled her father's words in his definition of Dushta Chathushtayam. Shakuni was one of the wicked four with Duryodhana, Dushasana and Karna, the one she had willingly married in spite of this slur on him. The epithet stuck, but Shakuni was the most wicked, the most vile of them all. And as honor among villains goes, it was ironic that out of the four, two loathed each other. Karna was at his arrogant worst whenever he was near the devious old man, and Shakuni never missed a chance to remind Karna that he was a king only through the blessings of his nephew Duryodhana. Dushasana did not bother to give Karna the respect he expected. In greeting, he always bowed low to Uruvi, but he never bent his head or folded his hands for Karna. Karna noticed this but remained silent. "Why do you take their insults so easily?" she blurted out one day, when she couldn't bear to see the hurt in his face. "Because I don't want to hurt Duryodhana. They are his brother and his uncle," he said simply. "And how much can Duryodhana protect me? It's how it's always been. I have got used to such unpleasantness. I have lived with it long enough, and I'll have to live with it till the end. But you, Uruvi, you will have to toughen yourself too. You will have to learn to live with this humiliation." "I try to, oh, why do we live in this hell?" she cried. "I didn't have a choice. I was born into it. You had an option, but you chose to marry an outcast like me," he said, his lips tightening slightly. "No, I am not regretting my decision, if that's what you mean, but yes, it hurts. It hurts badly. Till now, I didn't realize the world could be such a cruel place." She had said these words in a whisper, her voice deadened with a strange hopelessness. Karna recognized this and gave a deep sigh. Uruvi said plaintively, "How could you live like this? It's torture. Why can't you get away from them? You know well I cannot. Anything is better than this. This is a life of degradation, of humiliation, and worse, knowing that you are the wrong person in the wrong place with the wrong people doing the wrong things. Oh, Karna, don't you ever think it's a..." she implored, her eyes glistening with despair. He could not look at her, the desperately expectant look in her eyes was too much to bear. Timidly, she stretched out her hand to touch his. He covered her hand with his and squeezed it tightly, as if clutching at the last vestige of hope. "I want to make you happy. You are all I have got. I love you. But I can't forsake that one man whom you want me to renounce for you." She released her hand from his and stood up. She went over to the long mirror at the end of the room and said, "It's about time we got ready, your parents are expecting us downstairs." As the wife of Karna, Uruvi had resigned herself to the reality that she had to live with enemies. Her father had cautioned her, so had Kunti. It was not just a word of warning, it was their last plea to protect her from certain lifelong misery, from the relentless ill treatment she could not escape from. By not obeying them, she had hurt them as much as she had hurt herself. She detested being known as the wife of one of the Dushta Chathushtayam, a description that filled her with shame. "No," she cried, "he is not wicked. Karna is not a villain. He is good, he is noble, and I love him for that." But the world was not listening to her silent cries. She would have to carry the burden of this stigma as well. Since her marriage, she could not look at the Pandavas straight in the eye, especially Arjuna, whom she had spurned for his arch-rival. With her parents, she was always on the back foot, knowing that they were experiencing her hurt and humiliation as well. The same guilt swamped her whenever she was in the presence of Krishna or Bhishma Pitamaha. She avoided them or glanced at them covertly as if wanting to rush off and hide. She found it difficult to reconcile herself to this apologetic way of living. But she had to endure it. She had to suffer the way people looked at them, at her, at Karna, the false sympathy she had to often put up with. The embarrassment that deluged her often made her hate herself. Nor could she stand the contempt people showed for Karna. She sometimes wished she was more thick-skinned, so that she could see nothing, feel nothing. It was misery that forced her to chat, to laugh off their scorn and remain agreeable even when the nastiest tongues wagged. She had to learn to survive, and the only place she could hide was in the recesses of her thoughts, her silent tears slipping softly down the shadowy contours of her face, dripping into the darkness.